Mammals learn how to live by playing. A little lion cub will bite its mother, and the little lion cub will know that this is an ironic bite. It's a play bite. It's a bite that's not a bite. Well, that's sort of where we get theatre, where you have a play and it's a whole series of events, but they're not the actual events. They're a play of the events. This is this amazing thing about human beings, that we're this kind of bag of tricks in which we come to understand things by imagining them, and you and I come to understand each other. If we met as little primary school kids, we'd sort of play some games together. The speaking of our language is a kind of a game because it's got all these rules. That's life, and it's a very profound thing.
Okay, Nicholas, that was video 18. Let's recap on shared versus private. Why is that important?
So this is this idea that I had to try. In a way, we in the modern world have descended into a massive trench, and on one side is the left wing, and on the other side is the right wing, and the left and the right. So the right believe in competition, individual responsibility, and all that stuff, and the left keep wagging their finger and saying, no, we should all cooperate. So these are ideologically coded ideas, and so they're morally coded, and we can't agree on them. And so I think an unideological way to think about this is that everything has a private and a shared aspect. And this is well established by a game, the rules are the shared aspect, the players are competing. If you don't have the rules, they can't compete properly. And that says a lot about the way these different roles should be pursued. And our society, for a whole bunch of intriguing reasons, not all of which I understand, has got itself into a situation where one institution after another is overly oriented around private interests. Powerful private interests are colonising these what matters in the centre. To put simply, powerful and wealthy people have a huge influence on how the rules are made of our economic game, our political game, and that's obviously a problem.
Just thinking about games, it occurs to me like games are as old as politics, or possibly older, and also games spring up more organically, like children. Children create games out of nothing, and they work out a set of rules. Now, sometimes the rules are so convoluted, the game falls in on itself. But the game doesn't, unless somebody takes the ball and runs home with it, which is the ultimate destruction of the shared space, unless the rules collapse the game itself. The game generally carries on. Like, children are better at this than adults when it comes to
Well,
the shared
I think
space.
that's right. Yeah, I think that's right. And children are great improvisers. So we teach each other this thing. I often think that this is that if you look at different types of animals, cold-blooded animals, lizards don't play. Lizards just get around. I hope I'm not defaming any lizards who are watching, but I think that's true. And then you get to mammals. And mammals, I wrote a blog post about this, mammals learn how to live by playing. And so a little lion cub will bite its mother, and the little lion cub will know that this is a bite. It's an ironic bite. It's a play bite. It's a bite that's not a bite. Well, that's sort of where we get theatre, where you have a play and it's a whole series of events, but they're not the actual events. They're a play of the events. And that's how, so again, this is this amazing thing about human beings, that we're this kind of bag of tricks in which we come to understand things by imagining them, and you and I come to understand each other. If we met as little primary school kids, we'd sort of play some games together. The speaking of our language is a kind of a game because it's got all these rules. That's life, and it's a very profound thing. That means something else. That means is that when we work out what's right and wrong, a lot of this will be in words, and we can counterfeit, we can pretend to have one set of motives while we have another set of motives, and so on. So there's a lot to unpack once you get to the bite that's not a bite.
So the games work because there is an agreement over what the rules are and how breaking the rules is mutually destructive. What's gone wrong with politics?
Well, yeah, let me just enrich that by saying that games, we play games because they engage us, and one of the things that separated the winners from the losers when the internet got invented and social media got invented is that the winners all knew that whatever marvelous stories you spin about what you can gain from this social media, this social network, if you don't make sure everyone immediately wants to do something right now, you won't win the race. So we are a game playing species. So that's that's right at the foundation. So then, anyway, if you remember what your question is, you can ask it again.
So games are natural. They carry on. Sometimes they break down into acrimony, but the basic structures of it, the shared rules, the common understanding, that should seem so natural. And yet, what's the difference then when it comes to while we rule ourselves, we want to have this common understanding. It's something that's broken. What is it?
Yeah. So I think so a way to think about that is to think about me and my brother in a paddock. We grew up on a farm and we used to throw a frisbee at each other. And the game was that you would each try and throw the frisbee further than the other person and away from the other person, but not outside the paddock. And then the person who got to the other end won the game. And as we did this, we had a lot of fun. And then, I might have worked out a way that I could throw the frisbee and it would roll in a certain way. And then my brother would say, well, hang on, this game isn't about rolling frisbees, it's about flying frisbees. And then we would take 3 or 4 steps to throw the frisbee, and then you'd say, well, you've run further than I did, and so on. So this is kind of built into the game that we have to show restraint, there has to be these two parts of us that are entangled in the entanglement with the other person. And there's the competitive part. This is about me. And then there's I'm not going to have any fun if I'm not in this game. And there is some semblance of fairness. And that's really what's happening with many of our institutions, that powerful people want to take a few extra steps before they throw the frisbee, and they head down to Parliament or put on or fund campaigns to convince people that they're right, although they found out fairly early on that wasn't a very efficient way to do it. What you do is you demonize the other side and you change the subject and you develop the dark arts of politics, and those things are more effective. Lots of people are paid a lot of money to practice those dark arts. And part of my motivation in making this series is to say that we've got to get beyond just demonizing them, because many of the people practicing what I call the dark arts are doing it because the other people are practicing the dark arts, and it's only the dark arts that work.
Also, is it fair to say that, and we talk about demonizing politicians, that actually most of them, they get involved because they want to change something. It's not necessarily the naked venal pursuit of power and wealth. Actually, there's a lot of good intentions. They get changed by what it takes to play this particular game with these loaded dice.
Yeah.
And also there's probably a belief that if I don't do it, someone else will, or this is the best we can get done within the system. But everybody gets changed by the system. And a lot of them would gladly cleave to a new way if it gave them a moral salve, somebody else to blame. Like, for example, one thing you see in Ireland, when it comes to having some sort of higher power, you see politicians here, and I don't know whether the same thing applies in Australia, whether the same structures are there, but sometimes politicians, when bringing in something that involves more regulations, and is ultimately maybe good for consumers or for workers or whatever, that what they do is they say, look, personally, I wouldn't be for this, but the EU, the European Union, are making us do this.
Yeah, that's right.
That gives them an out. And even though they secretly believe in what the EU is saying, they are in front of their own voters, the self-interest of their own voters, they're still believable and plausible. So what you're talking about, sometimes it's not just a noble other way, it's also a slightly more expedient way to give people cover.
Yeah. I mean, it's like those things I was talking about with regard to play and language and so on. It's a whole maze. And I think if you look into your own psychology, I mean, you might be a better person than me, Colm, but we do this all the time. We do something, someone calls us on it, we think it's okay. We did it, think it was okay. We also might have done it knowing that somebody else wouldn't like it. And then we reach out for ways to defend. And we're not 100% bona fide in doing that. We are bona fide enough to convince ourselves that we're right and they're wrong. And maybe we are right and they're wrong, but we're not going to concede too much. And this is just the way we are. And again, we're lost in this in politics, because the way I see it, there is a sentimental mythology about politics which casts us, the voters, as the good guys and the politicians as the bad guys. Now, The only thing I'd add to your description of many politicians is I think of them, I know a lot of them, and I think of them as good people, and they've all got egos, and that's, they can do bad things, and they're not saints. I've never met one a successful politician or even an unsuccessful politician who's a saint, but they're okay people. And this system, like if you're a barrister for your side, you're a barrister for someone, you might think they probably are guilty of the crime they're being convicted for, but you're arguing the case as best you can for them.
Okay, so one of the things we've talked about a lot is that, politics has become theatre. Theatre keeps us engaged as well. Are you talking about more boring politics with less theatre, less fun?
Well, it's very interesting. You see, the way you put that, I think, actually, let me give you a quick answer, and the answer is yes. Yeah. But the way you put that is, it's so revealing. Why is it that politics why do we think of politics as entertainment or even as fun or as that engaging? Most politics is about making sure the garbage is collected and so on and so forth. And it puts me in mind of a book that I came across. It's been written in the last 7 or 8 years, and I'm just loading it up now on my computer, and it's called The Reign of Appearances by a guy called Ari Adut. And he argues that a lot of democratic thinking goes like this. We think of Parliament or Congress as a theatre or a venue for deliberation. I'll leave the theatre out of it for the moment. A venue for deliberation, and we all know that the deliberation isn't perfect, but that the goal is to make the deliberation better. That sounds like a reasonable idea. Now, Ari Adut basically argues that you've just got the wrong metaphor, that if electoral politics is fundamentally theatre, and that you can have better and worse politics, but it's a category mistake to think of it as deliberation. You can get a bit of deliberation into that bit of theatre, but the more I've thought about this, the more I've been impressed with that argument, because you think of any part of any red line in politics, any thing that will have a politician thrown out of office or might win them an election, or ask yourself, what is the most effective way? Let's say that you're being unfairly treated by the bureaucracy in some way. How would you go about addressing that? I think all of the answers to all of those questions come from the world of theatre, not from the world of deliberation. I can back that up if you'll ask me a question that lets me draw breath.
Sure, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that will be a simple enough question. So just to stop you there, what are the rules of theatre that apply? What are the examples?
So one of the things that theatre insists on, the metaphor of the theatre, is that there's just a few people on the stage, 5, 6, 10, 20, and then there's hundreds, thousands, millions watching on. So it's a spectacle. It's a thing to be watched. That's one of the things that gives electoral politics its inevitably oligarchic texture. There isn't any way around that. If I want my views expressed, then one of the people on stage is going to express it for me. And they've got a lot of power because they're on the stage as far as political power is concerned. I'm sort of in their hands. Everything is, and so I watch this debate, and they're putting on a show because they're not sitting there. Let's say it's about abortion is perhaps not a very good idea, not a very good example. But let's say it's about tax. Let's say one party wants to put the tax rate on low-income earners up a little bit and reduce the top marginal rate of tax, and another party doesn't. Now, that is not a deliberation. That is a show. The two sides will put on the best show that they can. No one in this professionalized environment is going to say, actually, you make a very good point. I mean, they might do it as part of their rhetoric, but they're not going to stop and say, yeah, you've really given me something to think about. I might be wrong about that. That's to completely misunderstand what's happening. And yet the people watching on are kind of hankering for that to happen. Yeah, that's kind of what they're hoping for. They're hoping for the impossible.
We think it's a debate, and there isn't time for second opinions. There isn't time to say, hold on.
But there's not the motive. But there's not the motive either.
So
Because these people, it isn't the case that all these people, that they might not change their mind, but if they change their mind, they'll do it in a private room and they will probably then just paper over it when they're on stage in the same way that an actor in a play. I'm reminded of that line in an old sitcom that was very big in Australia when I was in school, and it was called Gilligan's Island, and Gilligan is a silly fellow, and he says, I saw that movie 15 times and the hero got the heroine every single time. We're watching this spectacle as if it'll be different this time. No, it won't be.
But it obviously it has a function because it gets us interested. And also theatre, if we're continuing the metaphor, inspires and stirs us with stirring speeches. Is there room for inspiration in your model, which we've spoken about with juries and that kind of thing? You know, the stuff that the human responds to emotionally in order to get involved or be interested. Like, or are we depending on the volunteer spirit, which is also innate in us?
See, I think you have in your mind an idea of democracy, which I'm now going to say something fairly radical and maybe unpopular, but this is the idea that we all kind of participate in democracy, and therefore that we participate in our democracy, all our democracy's important decisions in some kind of way. Now, of course, we want people to be interested. It's kind of human to be interested in what's happening around the world, the big questions in our own country. But I think what matters far more is my ability to say, look, I'm interested in these things. I'm not very interested in this, and this. I am interested in that, but I'm not very well. I haven't had time to really read up on it. And I want to trust I want people making those decisions that I basically trust. I might get pissed off with their decisions, but I know that they're trying to do the right thing. So that would be my first response. My second response is that ancient Greece wasn't short of inspiring people. And if you're a genuine body of ordinary citizens learning how much you love your other citizens, I'll just let that hang there. It sort of happens in citizen assemblies. These citizens, there are people around who can inspire them. And in fact, it's remarkable how many of these societies that use representation by sampling, representation by lotteries, have inspiring places. Athens is most obviously, Venice, Florence, and I'll just go one step further. I am inspired in a strange kind of way by it's in the last 15 years, the fusion of reality TV with talent quests. And one of the things that it's done is it's brought out talent that we just didn't know was there. And it's phenomenal talent. I mean, just the depth. Australia is not a kind of dancing country, and we had a thing called Strictly Come Dancing or something like that. And I thought, well, we'll go for about one season, about 100 good dancers. And our finals were pretty much as good as America, as the United States, and they've got hundreds of millions of people, and it is a dancing culture. Well, we went through, and I thought, well, we're not going to get through a second series with it intact. It wasn't the case. We went through a second and a third and a fourth. There is talent everywhere. And that's what a lottery is saying. So I think it's much more exciting. It's much more inspiring, but it isn't. We're not all sitting in the stalls eating our popcorn and yelling and saying, you whack him. You know,
So Dancing with the Stars without the public vote and popularity contest where the best dancers actually do end up winning the competition, because obviously that's the problem with Dancing with the Stars is our desire for a population or for a popularity vote, or else just a revenue generation of how to make money off it. I mean, if you took that out of it, then you'd have the perfect way of gathering all this talent for the citizens' assembly.
Indeed. Yeah. It's not perfect, but what it is what is there is an absolute revelation, and it's one of the reasons why. And again, we mightn't agree on this, but it's one of the reasons why when people say we need to kind of end capitalism, well, it depends what you mean by capitalism. But this is the thing I'm talking about now is a product of capitalism, and it's also a product of an open system, a system where people can come up with ideas and it nurtures stuff from the bottom. It's also doing some stuff from the top that I'm less keen on. But it's a very exciting thing.
That's a very interesting analogy, talent shows and that, because, some of the people involved are analogous, I never know how to pronounce that word, similar to politicians in that this is another way for them to get to power, which they might have got another way. But it also has lowered the barriers for people who would never have made it. So again, continuing the dancer politician analogy, people who did not have enough money for dancing lessons 25 years ago and danced by themselves
Yes,
I don't know. I don't
that's
know what
right.
the analogy for politicians is that. But
Yeah.
either way,
Well,
it's not a complete it's not complete randomness, but it has created this pool of people who, for various reasons, geographical or money or confidence or mental or physical health at crucial moments, couldn't get to where
yeah,
they are now via the
that's right.
normal traditional routes.
That's right. That's exactly the point, the thing. And here's another thing to think about. We love sport and we love dance. And one of the things that we love about them is that the best people win. And that's not true in politics at all. Politics, now, an election is set up so that it actually puts us in a position to make sure the best people win. Then there's an election and someone wins, and then we figure that's not quite really what we had in mind.
Yeah,
So
and
one way to think about it,
how many times has any population asked another population, how could you have voted
yeah,
such an awful person into power? You
yeah,
know, in Ireland, we will slate other constituencies who've returned some awful person, you know, and basically condemn the entire county for their
yeah,
stupidity.
yeah.
And obviously, so yeah, it's set up to have the best person, yet we continually sabotage ourselves by falling for their bullshit. Is that what's happening?
Yeah, yeah. Well, and the media won't show us the people who are not bullshitting because they're not as entertaining and we won't tune in. And they might be boring. So there is just sort of layers upon layers. But it's always fascinated me that there are these things where there is not much, there is pretty much complete alignment between quality and winning. And that's true of sport. And so you just watch these miraculous things that people have trained themselves to do because they want to compete with someone else. And it's true in dance, and it's true in Britain's Got Talent and all these sorts of things. A classic example, not in dance but in song, is Susan Boyle. Now you can like Susan Boyle or not like Susan Boyle, but Susan Boyle was able to bring something that inspired people. It inspires me. I occasionally replay that audition that she did. It's a miraculous event. And I really think, I'm convinced that representation by lottery sends this signal that everyone gets their 10 minutes, not of fame, but of being in a position to make a responsible, important decision and to learn, and not to do it irresponsibly by doing it emotionally, but by learning about it and by saying, look, I'm not happy making this decision. I'd like to know a little bit more about that and that, and I want to hear from this person and that person.
And crucially, sticking with, not to harp on about talent shows and all that, but what's interesting is they gain competency away from prying eyes. So they get to make mistakes.
Yes,
now they
nice.
perform at discrete moments,
That's right.
Yeah. and the Citizens Assembly will make a decision. But the absence of constant exposure and need to perform, basically training, which is what we do in sport or in music, and we don't seem to train like the politicians. And I feel for them because they train publicly, like they acquire their competence either at local government. Now some arrive fully formed, but they have to make all their mistakes. Not only do they have to make their mistakes publicly, they have to do their deliberations publicly because they're asked for updates. Because it's never okay for them to say, I don't know the answer to that yet. I have not acquired. I am a teacher, and it's totally fine to be a teacher and become a politician. I'm a teacher who is now the Minister for Transport. It's going to take me some time to work out how to be Minister for Transport. And we don't have patience with them acquiring that expertise. It's ludicrous in some ways, and yet obviously we don't like technocratic governments either. Which there's always this wet dream of, imagine a cabinet full of experts, a doctor as Minister for Health, an engineer as Minister for Transport, but that doesn't seem to work either. It's funny. And maybe the answer is there's not enough people around the table, but we don't want to pay for more people around the table, say, at the ministerial level.
Yeah. So I think that's a really interesting point that you've raised, and let me perhaps foreshadow one of the things we will talk about with regard to the next video, and that is the question. There are two words that I can think of that are Teflon words in our democracy, which means they're all good. Sustainable is one of them, but I won't talk about that. One is transparency and another one is accountability. Now let's talk about transparency and secrecy. We all know that secrecy in government is bad. Well, another thing we know is that Americans are more and more frustrated with their Congress, with the gridlock in Congress. And this has got something to do with secrecy and transparency, because the mechanics of the deals across the aisles that were done was that committees would meet in secret, confident. They would meet, these are cross-party committees. They would meet in secret. The provision for them to meet in secret is actually written into the US Constitution. And then they will haggle. And the Democrats will say, well, we'll agree to this if you agree to that, and so on and so forth. And lots of problems got solved. And then in the 60s and 70s, civil rights people, all kinds of people with whom I think you and certainly I am very sympathetic, it became an important part of their political strategy to open up Parliament, open up Congress to show that, because at the time, because public opinion was turning against racism, it worked very well for them. But unfortunately, the other thing that it worked well for was the National Rifle Association, and those deals that could have been done in committee and then brought out into the open thing, and then everyone says, here's an omnibus bill, and we're all voting for it, and you go home and you say, yeah, I didn't like that bit, but that was necessary to get the deal. All that's off. Because if the NRA operative is watching a Republican, particularly a Republican, usually it's a Republican, say, yeah, look, I'm happy to negotiate on gun control, well, they'll get primaried. They will come after them and try and get them out of Congress by misrepresenting them and funding others to take their place as the Republican nominee. So now this isn't me saying, well, secrecy is the secret, but it is, I'm responding to your point about the need for balance between doing it in your own space and your public accountabilities. And I use this idea to suggest a unique and sneaky power for a citizen assembly, and I think I might turn that into a bit of a teaser for the next video.
I look forward to hearing more about that sneaky power in the remaining couple of videos, because we've been talking about this citizens assembly, but it will be interesting to hear the mechanics of it as well and find out how it might actually work.
Yeah.
Okay.
And the politics of it, because I'm not interested in going to politicians and saying, I want to persuade you I've got a good idea, because I know they're on the stage. They're not there listening to ideas, they're there performing ideas. So I've got another idea, and let's find out what that is next time we talk.
Look forward to that. See you soon, Nicholas.
Thanks.